Well, Kayleigh McEnany has been watching all this, preparing for all this, and the main thing that's on her plate as she recovers from the COVID-19 virus. White House press secretary, of course. Kayleigh, great to see you. First off, does it surprise you at all that behind the scenes, judiciary Democrats have been regularly meeting to divvy up their plans of attacking who could be Supreme Court Justice Barrett? Does that worry you?
No, it doesn't worry me in the slightest. Democrats really exposed themselves during the Kavanaugh hearings. The two lowest points for Democrats were impeachment and the Kavanaugh hearings. And here we are again. They will do the same antics. They will go down the same sort of attack lines. They may not attack her character, but they certainly will attack her faith, as we've seen them do before, talking about the dogma within her, which is a really disgusting attack on a mother, a woman of faith, and someone who's an upstanding citizen and would be a great justice.
Yeah. You know, in the meantime, we know that Kamala Harris will be questioning her probably tomorrow via Zoom or however they're going to set it up remotely. Joe Biden, in the meantime, has been asked repeatedly about, hey, listen, if you are elected president of the United States, to dilute the conservative majority, would you pack the court? It's a simple yes or no question, and it would have a simple yes or no answer. Does he do that? Watch this. Here he is in Vegas Friday.
Sir, I've got to ask you about packing the courts. And I know that you said yesterday you aren't going to answer the question until after the election. But this is the #1 thing that I've been asked about from viewers in the past couple of days.
Well, you've been asked by the viewers who are probably Republicans who don't want me continuing to talk about what they're doing to the court right now.
Well, sir, don't the voters deserve to know
No,
where
they
you
don't.
stand?
I'm not going to play his game. He'd love me to talk about, and I've already said something on court pack. He'd love that to be the discussion instead of what he's doing now.
He made it very clear we don't deserve to know until after he is elected, which makes you wonder what other surprises there would be. But Kayleigh, if you are a moderate, undecided voter or a Democrat or a Republican, you'd probably like to know one way or the other.
Yeah, you certainly would, and you're entitled to that. Of course, voters deserve to know. This is how seriously President Trump took his promises to the American people. He put out a list with the very names of who he would put on the Supreme Court. He didn't owe that to voters, but he gave it to them because he's transparent and wanted voters to know exactly where he stands. Yes, voters deserve to know if he will reshape the judiciary, eliminate the filibuster, which would reshape the legislature. Voters deserve to know, and that was a really elitist remark from Joe Biden.
Well, we've heard a lot of people say by not answering the question, they just assume that he will pack the court. But he was against it in 1983. Look at this video that we found.
President Roosevelt clearly had the right to send to the United States Senate and the United States Congress a proposal to pack the court. It was totally within his right to do that. He violated no law. He was legalistically absolutely correct. But it was a bonehead idea. It was a terrible, terrible mistake to make, and it put in question, for an entire decade, the independence of the most significant body, including the Congress, in my view, the most significant body in this country, the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
Kayleigh, he answered the question in '83. Why isn't he answering it now in 2020?
Because the answer is he would do the exact opposite of what he said back before AOC +3 and the radical left became his puppeteers. He would reshape the judiciary. That's why he can't say it out loud. And as he even noted there, Joe Biden's former self, when FDR tried this, it was a boneheaded idea and one that the Senate excoriated him for, saying it would fundamentally reshape the public. And make no mistake, that's what Kamala Harris, the most radical senator, and Joe Biden and AOC +3, his handlers, would do to this country.
Well, she was on her advisory board. And by the way, they formed their own group now, really trying to push Joe Biden before the election. So let's talk about what the president's schedule is going to be. It's going to be in, he is going to be in Sanford, Florida today. Then he's going to be in Johnston, Pennsylvania, then Des Moines, Iowa, then Greenville, North Carolina. When it comes to these events, will anything be different, Kayleigh, in terms of the distance and the more, I guess, more deliberate when it comes to putting on masks?
We will have the same policies that we've had in place. The campaign has always handed out masks, encouraged people to wear them, provided hand sanitizer. Ultimately, you have a right in this country to show up and express your political viewpoint. That's why we have peaceful protest, and you can't have one standard for the protesters out there on one side, but not for those wanting to express their First Amendment rights in support of this president.
Kayleigh, Dr. Fauci is out, and he's taken exception with one of your campaign ads where he is speaking positively about the federal government response to coronavirus in the early days. And he said, that was taken out of context. I've never said anything. I've never endorsed a candidate in my life's career. What do you have to say about the fact that he says he was taken out of context and he shouldn't be in your ad?
Well, I would encourage viewers to go watch the full context, which was on your channel on Mark Levin's show, where Dr. Fauci said that our response has been impressive, and he can't imagine anyone doing a better job ever. Those were Dr. Fauci's words. He noted that the travel restrictions saved lives, and that's history. And what this president has done, putting those in place when the Democrats were calling it xenophobic. So I would encourage folks to go watch the Mark Levin interview.
So doctors say that the president is no longer at risk, but yet the debate on Thursday that was scheduled for Thursday has been canceled, essentially. They said they wanted it virtually. President said he wasn't going to do that. President's now asking to reschedule that debate. What have you heard from the commission?
Nothing. Radio silence. They are a bunch of partisans. The Daily Caller did an expose and exposed that a majority of folks on this commission are never Trumpers, are anti-President Trump. They do not represent the country. You have 175 doctors, according to the New York Post, that have said this is medically safe to do. Health-wise, this is safe. But the Commission on Presidential Debates is covering for Joe Biden, who had a disastrous debate performance.
Let's move on and talk about something that would help a lot of people in this country, and that's a stimulus bill, another rescue package. When you look at people like Cory Gardner in a fight for his life for a Republican, Tom Tillis, fight for his life, Joni Ernst, fight for their seat in Iowa, they've seemed to really think that that's what the people of their states want. Right now, the Republicans are at $1.8 trillion. Nancy Pelosi is at $2.2 trillion. Why can't a package come together? What do you say to Senate Republicans that don't want to go along with what the president wants?
Well, I believe Senate Republicans would ultimately come along with what the president wants. The president noted that yesterday, too. We believe Senate Republicans are not what's blocking this. It is Democrats. You look at both sides. One side has been moving, and it has been the Republican side moving to $1.6 trillion, moving to $1.8, giving more school funding than they asked for. Nancy Pelosi is sitting staunchly, and I don't know if she's in her salon these days or back in Congress, sitting staunchly in her position, not moving towards us, and the American people deserve better.
Speaking of COVID, Governor Andrew Cuomo has gotten praise over the last 6 months or so for the way New York State has handled.
He's got a book out.
Yeah, he does. But at the same time, there are stories that Joe Biden would like to consider Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, as his attorney general. And in fact, people inside the Democratic Governors Association are so concerned they're talking about how to fill his vacancy if he becomes attorney general. What do you think about him as AG?
I think it's a disastrous decision. Another radical leftist in the administration is what Joe Biden's looking at. And in terms of his COVID response, I just got to say, he went against guidelines. He went against CDC guidelines by shoving people with COVID back into nursing homes, not utilizing the ship we sent, the extra capacity in hospitals we sent. There would be a lot more people alive today if Andrew Cuomo had done his job as governor, listened to CDC guidelines, and not put people back into nursing homes.
All right, Kayleigh, great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Wait a second. When are you going to be back, Kayleigh? Have you tested negative twice yet?
I haven't tested yet, but I will be back in probably 48 hours. So I'm looking forward to it. Day 8 right now.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness.
Good luck.
I know you want to hug your baby.
I do.
I know. That's what's so heart-wrenching. Well, there's so many things that are heart-wrenching about this, but all these moms that can't